In the very first scene of Attack on Titan, a small boy wakes up crying, and he cannot say why. By the end of the story, that single moment turns out to hold a secret that took the writer more than 10 years and 2,000 years of in-world history to fully explain. Most people remember this show as Humans Against Giants, a war for survival behind three great walls. The real story was hidden in plain sight from the first frame, tucked into a name, a dream, and a tree, waiting for anyone patient enough to find it. Over the next few hours, every major theory and confirmed truth in this world gets laid out slowly and clearly, from the origin of the very first Titan to the meaning of the final scene. All of it real, all of it canon. Welcome to Inabrayan. Let's get into it. Section 1. The name was a warning. Most people who start Attack on Titan believe they already understand it within the first few minutes. There are enormous creatures called Titans, and these Titans eat human beings. The last people left alive hide behind three giant stone walls, praying the monsters never find a way through. A young boy named Eren watches one of these creatures kill his mother in front of him, and from that day forward, he wants only one thing, which is to destroy every Titan that exists. Humans crowded together on the inside, hungry giants roaming on the outside, a long and hopeless war for survival between the two. That is the shape of the story as it first appears, and almost no one questions because the show gives every reason to accept it. The opening hour does everything it can to lock that simple reading into place. The very first real shock of the story is the moment a Titan taller than the wall itself rises up over the town out of nowhere, its red muscle steaming in the air, and kicks a hole straight through the gate. Smaller monsters pour through the gap and begin eating people in the streets. The terror is immediate and total, and the message it sends is clear. The giants are the enemy. The walls are the only safety. The people are the prey. A new viewer has no reason to look any deeper because the show is screaming a very straightforward kind of horror directly into their face. The world inside the walls is built to make that simple reading feel like the whole truth. The people who guard humanity are split into three groups, and the way those three groups are set up quietly says a great deal about how this society thinks. One group, the largest, spends its days keeping the walls in a good repair and standing watch on top of them, ready to hold the line if the monsters ever break through. Another group, the most respected and the most comfortable, lives deep in the safest inner ring, close to the king, serving the powerful and rarely facing any real danger. And then there is the third group, the one almost everyone looks down on, the only group brave enough or mad enough to actually leave the safety of the walls and ride out into the open land where the giants rule. That third group, the ones who go outside, are the soldiers Eren dreams of joining. The rest of society treats them as fools, throwing their lives away for nothing. Their missions beyond the walls almost always end in slaughter, with most of the soldiers eaten and only a battered handful crawling home. People grumble that these expeditions waste money and waste lives, and families weep when their children choose that path, because choosing it usually means choosing an early death. The soldiers who go outside are the only ones in the whole society who push forward instead of hiding, the only ones who keep charging out into the unknown no matter how many of them die doing it, and the story holds them up as something close to heroes, precisely because of that refusal to stay safe. The longing to go beyond the walls sits at the very center of who Eren is, and it was planted in him long before any monster broke through. As a child, Eren had a friend named Armin, a small and clever boy who owned a forbidden book that had been passed down in his family. That book described the world outside the walls, a world that the people inside were not supposed to think about. It spoke of a vast body of salt water so wide that no land could be seen on the other side, of water that burned, of great fields of ice and endless stretches of burning sand. To two boys who had never seen anything beyond their own town, those pages were like a door to another universe. Eren and Armin would pore over that book and promise each other that one day they would leave the walls behind and see all of it with their own eyes. Wanting that, though, was treated as something close to crime. Inside the walls, curiosity about the outside world was frowned upon and even feared. The people in charge wanted everyone to stay calm, stay grateful, and stay put, content to live their whole lives inside the stone rings and never wonder what lay past them. Most people did exactly that. They built quiet, ordinary lives in the cage and felt lucky to have walls at all. Eren could not do it. The very idea of living and dying inside a box without ever seeing what was out there made him furious. He looked at the contented faces around him and saw cattle who had given up, and the sight of it filled him with a restless, burning need to break out. The boy was built around forward motion from the start, a person who could not stand to be penned in, and that restlessness is the engine of his entire character. This first impression of the story feels complete. It also walks right past the one clue that was sitting at the top of the screen the entire time. The name of the show carries the answer. In the country where it was made, which is Japan, the story is not called Attack on Titan at all. Its real name there is Shingeki no Kyojin. The man who wrote and drew the entire thing, an artist named Hajime Isayama, picked those words himself years before the rest of the world had heard a single thing about his story. He began the tale in the year 2009 and did not finish it until 2021. More than a decade of work poured into one enormous story, and the name sat at the top of it from the very first chapter all the way to the last. When the show traveled overseas and was given an English name, it became Attack on Titan. The two names look like they should be twins. They are closer to cousins. In Japanese, the name is written using a small handful of symbols, and each piece points somewhere specific. One part of it carries the meaning of a charge forward, a push, an attack that keeps moving and refuses to stop. Another part simply means giant. Joined together in the plainest way possible, the name means something close to the advancing giant, or the giant that charges ahead. The wording leans toward a single creature, one giant, not a faceless crowd of monsters pressing against a gate, but one particular giant defined by the fact that it moves forward and never backs down. The English name pulls in a slightly different direction. Attack on Titan sounds like people are attacking something called Titan, or like the Titans are doing the attacking, which fits the early episodes perfectly. Cannons fire at the Giants crush the town. The whole feeling is two armies smashing into each other, and the looser English name matches that feeling beautifully. So both names settled in and stayed side by side for years. The small gap between them went unnoticed by nearly everyone, and inside that small gap, the story kept a secret. There is a clue about the show's true heart sitting right on the backs of its heroes, and it points in the same hidden direction the name does. The soldiers who ride out beyond the walls, the group Eren is so desperate to join, wear a symbol on the backs of their cloaks. The symbol is two overlapping wings, one pale and one blue, and that symbol has a name. It is called the Wings of Freedom. These soldiers carry freedom on their backs as they charge out into the most dangerous place in their world. The idea of pushing forward and the idea of being free are stitched together into a single image, worn by the very people who run straight at death in the hope of seeing what lies beyond the walls. That pairing runs all through the early story, without ever being spelled out plainly. When these soldiers salute, they press a closed fist hard against their own heart, a gesture that means they are offering their hearts, their whole lives, to the cause of pushing humanity forward. The music that plays over the show drives the same feeling, full of the language of charging ahead and breaking loose. And one of the show's most famous songs is even named after those same wings of freedom. The push outward and the longing to be free are treated as the same hunger, two names for one feeling. The advance is the reach for freedom. Charging forward is how these people chase the open world they have been locked away from. So the word buried in the show's name, the idea of a giant that charges ahead, was never only about violence. It was about the deep need to break out, to keep moving, to refuse the cage. The name, the winged symbol, the salute, and the songs are all quietly telling the same story long before the plot catches up to it. Much further into the tale, long after the early battles, the show pulls back a curtain that changes the meaning of the word Titan completely. The giants are not all the same kind of creature. Among the countless mindless monsters, there are 9 special Titans, each one carrying real power and a real name, each one passed down from person to person across history. The names of these 9 are revealed slowly, often through the memories of the people who carry them, and one name lands harder than all the rest. One of these 9 special Titans is called the Attack Titan. Its name, written in Japanese, is Shingeki no Kyojin, the exact same set of words as the title of the entire show. And the person who carries the Attack Titan, the one creature the title was always describing, is Eren himself. So the name had been pointing at the boy all along. The advancing giant, the giant that charges ahead and never stops. The one that the title quietly names before every chapter of the story is Eren and the power that lives inside him. The crowd of monsters at the gate were never the title. The hero was. The trait of the Attack Titan makes the name fit even tighter. Inside the story, the people who have carried this particular power across the centuries share a single stubborn quality. They have always fought for freedom, and the power itself is described as one that keeps pushing forward no matter what stands in its path. It has never bowed to any king. It has never accepted a leash. Across 2,000 years of history, the holders of the Attack Titan kept moving toward freedom, refusing to kneel, refusing to stop, as though the power itself carried a will that could not be tamed. Eren's entire personality is a perfect mirror of this. From childhood, he is the kind of person who cannot stand to be held back, who treats a locked door as something to break rather than something to respect. The walls protect him, and he resents them for it. The word at the heart of his Titan, the idea of charging ahead toward freedom, was already written into who he was before he ever knew the power existed, and it matches the winged symbol he so badly wanted to wear and the book of the outside world he memorized as a boy. The cleverness of all this lives in the timing. The most important fact about the main character, the truth that reframes the whole show, is hidden inside the title card that flashes on screen at the opening of every single episode. A brand new viewer reads those words as a cool fighting phrase, feels a little thrill, and forgets about it. Someone who has reached the end of the story reads the very same words and sees Eren's name buried inside them. The words on the screen never change. The person reading them did. That is the trick, and it is a quiet one, because nothing flashes or announces itself. The answer simply waits. This is the first proof of how the entire story likes to work. Attack on Titan tucks its biggest answers into spots where they look like background, and it trusts the audience to circle back and notice them once they know enough to understand. The name is the simplest version of that habit, a small handful of words placed where everyone could see them, holding a truth that no one could read correctly until the very end. Once that pattern becomes clear, the rest of the show starts to feel different, because it means the early episodes are not as innocent as they pretend to be. They are full of hints dressed up as ordinary moments. There is one more layer to the name worth sitting with. The looser English version, the one that sounds like a clash between two armies, turns out to carry its own kind of truth by the end. Eren does become an attacker. The boy who started out wanting to defend his home eventually becomes the most frightening force in his world, the one charging forward against everyone else. So the English name, which seemed like a small mistranslation, ends up describing the final shape of the story in its own crooked way. Both names are correct. The Japanese one names the character, the English one names what he does. Together, they hold the beginning and the ending of Eren's journey, and they were both printed on the cover the whole time. A great deal of the show rewards this kind of second look. Lines of dialogue that sound like throwaway comments turn out to be confessions. Small background images turn out to be answers to questions the story has not even asked yet. The pattern starts with the name and never really stops. Once the habit is spotted, watching the early episodes again becomes a strange experience because the calm and simple survival story is sitting on top of something far larger, and the surface keeps dropping tiny signals that something is wrong with the easy version everyone believed at first. The fall of the wall, the day Eren's whole life breaks apart, is the perfect example of a scene that hides more than it shows. On a first watch, it plays as pure tragedy and chaos. A wall falls, a mother dies, a boy makes a promise through his tears. Every part of it reads as the random cruelty of a world full of monsters. Yet the deeper the story goes, the more that day starts to look less like an accident and more like a piece of something arranged, a moment that had to happen in a certain way for reasons that the boy crying in the rubble could not begin to guess. The name pointing at Eren is the soft opening note of that idea. If the show was always secretly his story, then the events that seem to happen to him deserve a second, harder look. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That harder look leads somewhere uncomfortable. The name reveals that Eren is the giant the title describes, and that he is built around the urge to push forward and never stop. But pushing forward through what exactly, and how far back does that push reach? There are moments scattered through the earliest parts of the story, moments that pass by without anyone blinking, where it begins to seem like Eren was already present and already steering things, standing in places where he could not possibly have stood. The name was the first clue that the boy was the center of everything. The next clue suggests that his reach stretched into corners of the story that came long before he was even born. Section 2. A circle with no beginning. By the final stretch of the story, the audience has learned that Eren is far more than an angry young soldier swinging blades at monsters. He ends up carrying more than one of the special Titan powers, and the one that matters most for this part of the tale is the Attack Titan, the same power the show is secretly named after. These special powers behave in an unusual way when they pass from one person to the next. The new holder does not only gain great strength and the ability to become a giant, they also receive the memories of everyone who carried the power before them. The whole long chain of strangers stretching back through time, poured into their head like borrowed pieces of other lives. Most of the 9 special Titans work this way, and they only look backward into what has already happened. The Attack Titan refuses to follow that rule. Its holder can look the other way down the chain. Along with the memories of the people who came before, the carrier of the Attack Titan can reach the memories of the people who will carry it in the years to come. For this one power, time runs in both directions at once. The past and the future are both open doors. A person holding the Attack Titan can stand inside a memory that has not technically happened yet, because someone in the future will live it and pass it back down the line. Grisha, Eren's father, carried the Attack Titan before Eren ever did. That single fact becomes the key to everything. Because Eren later held the same power, Eren could reach back into his dead father's memories and walk around inside them. The son could visit the father's life. And far stranger, the father, while still alive, could catch glimpses of his son's life that had not yet arrived. The power came to Grisha from a man named Eren Kruger, handed over years before Eren Yeager was even born. Grisha then carried it for more than a decade, living quietly inside the walls, marrying, raising a family, and hiding the monster he could become. On the night the outer wall first fell and the town burned, Grisha gave the Attack Titan, along with an even greater power he had taken, to his young son. From that night onward, Eren held both, though he understood almost nothing about what had been placed inside him. That greater power is called the Founding Titan, and obtaining it had cost Grisha something terrible. The Founding Titan had belonged to a family called the Reese, who lived in secret in a hidden place beneath the walls. To take their power, Grisha did the worst thing a person can do. He killed them. He killed the Rice family, including a child, so that he could seize the Founding Titan and one day pass it to Eren. For most of the show, this killing sits in the shadows as a dark deed Grisha committed out of desperation, a grown man making a hideous choice in service of a cause he had given his whole life to. The real story behind that night arrives as one of the most jaw-dropping episodes of the entire show, an episode named Memories of the Future. By this point, Eren has met an older half-brother named Zeke, a man who desperately wants to pull Eren away from their father's grip. Zeke is convinced their father stuffed Eren's mind full of dangerous beliefs, and he uses his own ability to walk Eren back through Grisha's memories, hoping the journey will prove it. The two brothers drift through the dead man's life the way visitors drift through a museum, watching old scenes replay around them. Then they arrive at the night of the Reese family's deaths, and the floor falls out from under the whole story. Inside the memory, Grisha hesitates. Standing before the family he has come to kill, including a frightened young girl, he wavers and cannot make himself do it. The mission he has carried for years suddenly feels impossible, and in that exact moment of weakness, future Eren appears inside his father's memory and pushes him forward. Eren, reaching back across time from years away, urges his own father to commit the murders. Grisha, shaking and confused, asks the boy why he is doing this, why he will not let him see everything. Eren answers only that he has always been the way he is, and that no person living or dead controls him. Then Grisha goes through with it. He kills the family, takes the founding titan, and the road that leads to Eren's future snaps firmly into place. The eeriest detail in the whole scene is that Grisha, standing in that old memory, can somehow see Zeke, even though Zeke was nowhere near that place on that night. The explanation lands with a chill once it settles. Grisha was viewing the scene through future Eren's eyes, and Zeke happened to be standing right beside Eren in the present while the brothers watched. The dead father was looking forward through time at the very same second that his two sons were looking back at him. Two moments separated by many years, staring straight at each other, meeting inside a single memory like people on opposite banks of a river finally seeing one another. This is the point where the shape of the story bends into something the mind struggles to hold. Grisha gave Eren the Attack Titan and the Founding Titan. Grisha only did that because future Eren reached back and pushed him into it. Future Eren only existed with those powers because Grisha had already handed them over. The cause makes the effect, and the effect turns around and makes the cause. Searching for a true beginning leads nowhere because there is no first link in the chain. The circle simply spins, the future quietly writing the past while the past dutifully delivers the future, around and around with no edge to grab onto. The circle reaches into an even more painful corner of the story. The day that broke Eren, the day a grinning titan lifted his mother into the air and ate her while he stood helpless, had always been treated as the cruelest accident imaginable. Their houses had collapsed in the attack, pinning his mother Carla under a heavy beam. A soldier who knew the family tried to help and then lost his nerve and ran, carrying the screaming children away as the monster closed in. The creature that killed her had seemed to wander toward the house by pure rotten luck. The finale erases that luck completely. Eren himself, using his power, guided that very titan toward his own mother. He steered the thing that ate her. He had already seen what his life needed to become, and that life required a boy standing in the rubble with a dead mother and a heart full of hate. So he allowed it to happen, more than allowed it. He arranged it with his own hands, reaching back through the years to make sure the worst day of his childhood arrived exactly on schedule. The weight of that truth is almost too much to carry. The single event that gave Eren his reason to fight, the open wound at the very center of who he is, was something his older self reached back and did to him on purpose. His grief was self-inflicted, delivered across time by his own hand. Every promise he ever made over his mother's death, every titan he tore apart while screaming her memory, traces back to a decision his future self made to keep the story rolling down its track. The boy spent years mourning a loss that the man had personally ordered. There was a cold and deliberate reason behind such a thing. Eren had seen a future he wanted to reach, a future where his closest friends lived and where the people he loved were finally free, and arriving at that future meant certain events had to unfold precisely as he remembered them unfolding. His mother's death was one of those locked events. Without that loss, the boy would never have joined the army, never have pushed forward with such fury, never have grown into the advancing giant the title quietly knew. To protect the ending he wanted, Eren had to keep the beginning exactly as cruel as it had always been, down to the last terrible detail. Buried inside all of this is a bitter and quiet joke. Freedom is the one thing Eren craves above everything else. He despises cages, despises walls, despises the idea of anyone telling him where he can and cannot go. And yet the picture the show slowly paints is of a young man with almost no freedom at all. He walks a path he has already watched himself walk. He performs the actions he has already seen himself. He cannot step off the road, because the road is paved with his own memories of a future that has not happened yet. The character who hunts freedom harder than anyone in the story ends up the most trapped person in it, sealed inside a loop he built around himself without ever meaning to. The show plants a real puzzle here and chooses not to fully solve it. A fair person can ask whether Eren ever truly decided anything, or whether he was only repeating actions he had already glimpsed in advance. If he saw the future and then went out and made that future real, the question of whether he chose it or merely obeyed it fully closes. The story lets both answers breathe at the same time. Eren swears, over and over, that he moves forward because he wants to, because his will belongs to him alone. Whether that is the plain truth or the comforting lie a cornered person whispers to himself, stays unsettled to the very end. That open wound in the heart of the story is part of why people keep turning it over in their heads years after the credits roll. Some sympathy belongs to Grisha as well, a father who poured his entire life into a mission, who did unforgivable things while believing every choice was his own, only to learn that his not-yet-born son had been quietly steering him from a future he would never live to see. The man thought he held the pen of his own life. He was closer to a character being written by someone else. There is a heavy, lonely sadness in a parent shaped without his knowledge by his own child, taking orders from a voice that drifts back from years ahead. All of this connects straight back to the show's name. The title quietly pointed at Eren as the secret center of the whole story, the advancing giant the entire thing was truly about. The loop reveals just how deep that center reaches. Eren is not only the heart of the events happening in the present day. His fingers are pressed into the past as well, reaching backward through the decades, arranging the very tragedies that the early episodes served up as random misfortune. The story belonged to him in a way that runs far beyond simply being the lead character. He sits closer to a hidden author scribbling away inside his own book, deciding which sad things have to happen so that the ending he wants can arrive. True to the show's favorite habit, every piece of this was set down early and left sitting in plain view. The odd way Grisha sometimes seemed to know more than a man in his position should. The strange, tearful dreams that gripped Eren when he was small. The faint, nagging sense that the monster which killed his mother moved with a little too much purpose for a mindless beast. None of it looked like a clue while it was happening. All of it was. The answers waited patiently inside scenes that everyone watched and no one understood, exactly the way the true meaning of the name waited at the top of the screen before every episode. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A circle with no beginnings still leaves one gigantic question hanging in. The Attack Titan, the power to bend memory across time, the founding titan that Grisha killed an entire family to steal, the whole strange machine that lets a boy reach into the past and rearrange it, all of it had to come from somewhere. None of these powers simply blinked into being. They were born once in a single moment, far further back than the walls or the war or anyone now drawing breath. 2,000 years before Eren ever wept over his mother, a single ordinary girl walked alone into a forest and touched something that had no business existing. What she found waiting for her there is the place where every titan, every power, and every twisted thread of this entire story quietly begins. Section 3, The Girl in the Tree, the story of Attack on Titan, reaches back much further than the walls, much further than Eren or his father or anyone whose name the show ever bothers to teach. To find the true beginning of all the power and all the horror, the tale travels back roughly 2,000 years, to a time before the cities and the cannons, when the world was wild and most people lived under the boot of whoever happened to be strongest. In that ancient world lived a young woman named Ymir. She was not a queen or a hero or a chosen one. She was a slave, owned by a powerful king named Fritz, treated as something less than a person by the people who ruled over her. Ymir's life was small and full of cruelty. She belonged to a tribe led by King Fritz, and her days were spent in fear and labor, the way the days of an enslaved person tend to go. One day, something went wrong among the king's animals, and Ymir was blamed for it, whether or not she had done anything at all. The punishment for a slave in that world was not gentle. As a kind of cruel game, she was set free to run and then hunted, with the king's people chasing her down for sport, firing arrows after her as she fled for her life through the trees. Wounded and desperate with nowhere left to go, Ymir stumbled to the base of an enormous old tree. The tree was hollow, and inside its trunk the ground gave way. Dropping down toward water that had gathered far below, she fell. Down in that dark, wet hollow beneath the roots, half drowned and alone, she came face to face with something that should not have been there at all. Resting in the water was a strange creature unlike any animal in the world above. It had a long, pale, shining body, a little like a centipede or a deep-sea worm, with no eyes and no mouth that anyone could point to, only a soft cluster of feelers waving from one end. It did not roar or attack, it simply reached for her. The creature joined with Ymir. It wrapped around her and bound itself to her spine, sinking into her body and changing her from the inside out. In that instant, the very first Titan was born, and Ymir became the first being in history to hold the power of the Titan. The strange thing in the water is the root of everything. Every giant that would ever stomp across the land, every special power that would be fought over for the next 2,000 years, every thread of the entire enormous story traces straight back to that pale creature in the dark and the broken girl it chose. The story keeps the nature of that creature wrapped in mystery on purpose, and the people inside the tale argue about what it really was. Ymir's own descendants, the people who worshipped her memory, told a comforting version in which a great and holy power blessed her and lifted her up, a gift from something close to a god. Their enemies told the opposite story, a frightened version in which Ymir made a bargain with the devil, a being of evil that crawled out of the earth and handed her a monstrous curse to punish the world. Across the centuries, these two legends hardened into stone, each side certain it knew the truth, each side using its version to decide who deserved to be hated. The closest thing the story offers to a real answer comes from those who looked past both legends. By their account, there was no god and no devil involved at all. There was only a creature, an odd living thing the story calls the source of all living matter, a name that hints it might be tied to the very start of life itself. This thing did not seem to think or scheme the way a god or a devil would. It behaved more like an organism searching for something. It bonded with living creatures and changed them in dramatic ways. And the proof was right there in the forest, because the great tree that had grown over its resting place towered far above every other tree around it, swollen to an unnatural size simply by being near the thing for so long. Whatever it was, the creature gave Ymir power beyond anything her world had ever seen. And the cruelest part of her story is what she did with it. A person handed the strength of a giant, the ability to crush armies and reshape the land, might be expected to break her chains and walk away from the man who had hunted her like an animal. Ymir did the opposite. She returned to King Fritz. She went back to her master and kept serving him. Only now her service could move mountain. The king used her power to wage war, to defeat his enemies, to flatten rival nations and build a vast empire that bowed to his name. Roads were laid and farmland was cleared and bridges were raised by the labor of the first Titan, all of it poured into the glory of the man who owned her. Her servitude went deeper still. Ymir bore King Fritz 3 daughters, named Maria, Rose, and Sina, names that careful viewers will recognize because those are the exact names later given to the 3 great walls that humanity hides behind. The walls in the show are named after the daughters of the very first Titan, a quiet thread tying the modern world all the way back to that ancient girl. For 13 years, Ymir lived this way, a being of unimaginable power who never once used it to free herself, pouring her whole monstrous strength into the wishes of the person who had hurt her most. Her death matched the shape of her life. During a moment when an enemy pretended to surrender to King Fritz, a soldier hurled a spear straight at the king, meaning to kill him. Ymir threw herself into its path and took the blow meant for her master. With her power, healing the wound would have been simple. A creature who could become a giant could have shrugged off a single spear without thought. Ymir chose not to. In that moment, she let go of her will to live, and she allowed herself to die for the man who had owned and abused her. Even at the very end, with godlike power running through her body, she could not imagine a single second of life that's truly her own. What happened to her after death is one of the saddest ideas the story carries. Ymir did not simply pass on the way most people do. Her power, and some piece of her very self, was pulled into a strange hidden place outside the normal world, a kind of endless in-between space connected to everyone who shared her blood. And there she stayed for 2,000 years, working without rest, still serving, still making the giants, long after the king and his whole empire had crumbled to dust. The creature in the water had promised her an escape from death, and the escape it gave her turned out to be a prison. She could not die and she could not rest. She simply continued, a slave even to the grave. One of the cleverest minds in the show offers a theory about why the power took the shape it did, and the idea is hard to shake. By this thinking, the power of the Titans was born out of Ymir's own fears. She had spent her whole life terrified, hunted, and in pain, and most of all, she was terrified of dying. So when the creature bonded with her, it shaped itself around what she felt. It gave her a body that was huge and nearly impossible to destroy, a fortress of flesh that no arrow could pierce. It gave her a way to live on past death, because death was the thing she feared above all. By this reading, the giants are less like monsters and more like the frozen shape of one frightened girl's deepest wish, the dream of a person who only ever wanted to feel safe and never have to die. That idea reaches into the heart of what the whole show is quietly about. The single word burned into Eren and into the title is freedom, the longing to break loose and move forward without anyone holding the leash. And the very first Titan, the source of all that power, was a person who had freedom placed directly into her hands and could not take it. Ymir held enough strength to do anything she wished and chose to keep wearing her chains because a lifetime of cruelty had carved the shape of a slave so deep into her that nothing could fill it back in. Every Titan that ever existed, every act of charging forward toward freedom, grew out of one girl who never managed to be free for a single day of her life. The contrast sits underneath the entire story like a stone. The show refuses, right to the end, to fully explain what the creature in the water actually was. No scientist in the tale ever cuts it open and names it. No ancient book ever spells out where it came from or what it wanted. It appears, it bonds with Ymir, it changes the world forever, and it keeps its secrets. That choice is deliberate, and it gives the whole story a strange dreamlike foundation. The walls, the wars, the powers, the loop that lets a boy reach back through time, all of it rests on top of a mystery that is never solved. The most important thing in the entire world of the show is a creature that no one truly understands, and the story seems to be saying that the beginning of life and power is not a neat fact to be filed away, but a riddle that resists every answer. This ancient moment ties directly into everything seen so far. The attack titan that lets Eren peer into the future, the founding titan his father killed to steal, the connection across time that allowed a son to whisper into his dead father's ear. Every bit of that machinery sprang from this one event in the dark beneath the tree. The creature that bonded with Ymir is the true source of the power that Eren later used to bend his own past into a circle. Long before Eren ever guided a monster toward his mother, the rules that made such a horror possible were written into the world by a frightened slave and a pale thing in the water. The boy at the center of the story inherited his strange gift from a girl who lived and died 20 centuries before him, and who never had the faintest idea what she had set loose upon the future. The reach of that ancient creature did not fade with time. Much later in the story, when the modern characters finally peeled back the layers of history and stood at the very root of the power, the creature appeared once more, dragged up out of the past and into their present, and this time it had grown to a size that dwarfed even the largest giants. The thing that had begun as a quiet shape in a forest pool revealed itself to be something vast and waiting, a hint that the source of all this power had never really gone anywhere and had been sitting at the bottom of the world the entire time, patient and unchanged. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The death of Ymir left behind a problem that would echo for the next 2,000 years. Her power was far too enormous and too valuable to simply vanish when she died, so it carried on, passing into new hands and continuing the line she had started. But the power did not pass on cleanly or kindly. It came with a strange and merciless rule baked into it. A rule seems to have been set the moment Ymir herself died after exactly 13 years. Everyone who would ever inherit a piece of her power would find the same clock ticking quietly inside their own chest, counting down toward a deadline that none of them could escape, no matter how strong, how royal, or how clever they happened to be. Section 4. The 13-year clock when Ymir died after only 13 years of holding the power of the Titans, the power inside her did not die with her. It was far too large and too valuable for them. Instead, her strength carried on, passing into new bodies and continuing the line she had begun. Over time, the single great power that had lived inside Ymir was broken into pieces, split so that more than one person could carry a part of it at once. These pieces became the special Titans, each one a fragment of the first Titan's might, each one able to turn a person into a thinking giant rather than a mindless monster. For 2,000 years, these powers were passed down, fought over, stolen, and inherited, moving from hand to hand across the centuries. The people inside the walls knew none of this for most of the story. The truth about Ymir, about the powers, and about the rule that came with them stayed buried, quite literally, in a hidden basement beneath Eren's childhood home. Only after the soldiers fought their way back to that ruined town and finally cracked open the secrets waiting in that basement did the full picture begin to come together. Among the things they learned was a piece of knowledge so heavy that it changed how every powered character in the show had to be understood from that point forward. The special Titans came with a price, and the price was time. The rule is grim and simple. Anyone who gains one of the special Titan powers can live only 13 more years. Not 13 years from birth, but 13 years from the moment the power enters them. The instant a person inherits one of these abilities, an invisible clock starts ticking inside them, and when those 13 years run out, their life ends, no matter how healthy or young or careful they are. The reason traces straight back to Ymir herself. She lived exactly 13 years after the creature in the tree bonded with her, and the belief, spoken of as a kind of law of the world, is that no one who carries her power is allowed to outlast the first Titan. Whatever Ymir managed, her descendants may not surpass. So 13 years became the ceiling for every single one of them. This rule is often called the Curse of Ymir, and it does not bend for anyone. It does not matter how many of the special powers a person holds. It does not matter whether they come from the royal bloodline, the family that the most powerful of the Titans tends to favor. It does not matter how strong they are in battle or how clever they are in planning. The clock runs the same for all of them. The strongest warrior and the gentlest child face the exact same deadline once the power takes root, and there is no medicine, no ritual, and no amount of money that has ever been shown to buy a single extra day. The curse only grips a certain kind of person, though, which makes it stranger. The countless mindless giants that wander the land are not affected by it at all. Those creatures will keep shuffling along until something kills them, with no clock counting down inside them. The 13-year limit clamps down only on the rare people who can transform into the special, thinking Titans and still keep their own minds while doing it. The gift of becoming one of these giants and the curse of an early death arrive, together bound into the same inheritance, impossible to separate. The way the power moves from one person to the next is its own dark business. The usual path is brutal. When the holder of a special power is eaten by one of Ymir's descendants, the power leaves the eaten body and takes root into the one who did the eating, along with all the borrowed memory. That is how the abilities have traveled down the generations, through a long and bloody chain of one person consuming. But the power has a backup plan for when no one is around to inherit it the proper way. If a holder dies without their power being passed on, the power does not simply disappear. It leaps on its own across the land and into the body of a random newborn baby somewhere among people, choosing a fresh host without warning and without anyone's permission. A child can be born already carrying a doomed power and a ticking clock, and no one, not even the parents, would have any way to know. The clock's cruelty shows up clearly in the lives of the people the show follows most closely. The man who gave Aaron's father his power, a fighter named Kruger, was running out of time when he passed it on. He told Grisha plainly that he had only about a year of life left in him. The power was leaving him soon whether he liked it or not, so he handed it to a younger man who could carry the mission forward. Grisha took that power, and with it the same 13-year sentence. From that moment, Grisha was a man racing a clock. He had only 13 years to slip inside the walls, build a life, start a family, steal an even greater power, and set everything up so that his young son could one day take over. His whole frantic, secretive life makes more sense once the deadline is clear. A father moving that fast, taking risks that desperate, was a man who knew almost to the year when his time would be up. The clock reached Aaron too, and the moment he learned of it lands hard. Sitting with his friend Armin, working through everything the basement had revealed, Aaron came to understand that the same countdown had been running inside him since he was a small boy, since the night his father passed him the power. By the time the two of them sat there talking it through, Armin had only just inherited his own power, and so had the full 13 years stretched out ahead of him. Aaron had far less. Because his clock had started years earlier when he was only a child, he had just 8 years left to live. A teenager, barely beginning his life, already able to count the remaining years of it on his fingers. That knowledge sits underneath everything Aaron does afterward. A person who knows he will die young moves through the world differently than a person who expects to grow old, and Aaron had been quietly carrying that weight long before he understood where it came from. There is one corner of this rule that the story leaves genuinely unsettled, and honest fans have argued about it for years. The question is whether holding more than one of the special powers might somehow stretch a person's life past the 13-year limit. The suspicion grew out of a small detail. Aaron's father, who carried 2 of the powers near the end, did not seem to wither and weaken the way some other holders did as their time ran short. A few people who held only one power appeared to grow visibly frail in their final stretch, while Grisha did not look nearly so worn. That gap led some to wonder whether stacking powers buys extra time, and whether Aaron, who eventually carried several, might have a longer leash than the rules suggest. The story never clearly settles it, and there is a heavy piece of evidence pointing the other way, because Ymir herself, the very first Titan, held the complete and undivided power, every bit of it at once, and she still died at the 13-year mark like clockwork. So the idea that more power means more life may be nothing but a false hope, a comforting guess that the cold history quietly refuses to support. The show lets the question hang, and that lingering uncertainty is part of what keeps people turning the lore over in their minds. The deeper horror of the curse is what it does to the people who must live under it, year after year, generation after generation. Imagine knowing, with near certainty, the decade in which you will die, and knowing it not because of an illness, but because of a rule stamped into your blood. Every person carrying one of these powers walks around with that knowledge. They cannot grow old. They cannot build a long, slow life. Whatever they hope to do, they must do it fast, because the clock will not pause for love or family or second chances. That pressure twists everyone it touches. It explains the desperation that runs through so much of the adult world in the show, the sense that the people in charge are always rushing, always grasping, always treating the present moment as though it might be the last chance they get. For many of them, it is. The curse is cruelest of all in how it shapes families and children, because the powers must keep being passed down, and because each holder dies so young, the people who hold them are pushed to have children early and often, simply to make sure there is always a fresh body waiting to receive the power when the old one runs out. Whole bloodlines are bent around the need to keep the chain unbroken, and in the nation that turned the Titan powers into weapons of war, the cruelty reaches a sickening peak. There, children are raised and trained to compete for the honor of inheriting one of the powers, taught to want it, taught that earning it is the highest glory a person of their kind can reach. What they are really competing for, underneath all the medals and the praise, is a death sentence. The prize at the end of all that striving is the right to become a giant for a few short years and then die before reaching old age. Children chasing their own early deaths, believing the whole time that they are chasing something wonderful, is one of the quietest and most disturbing ideas the show ever puts on the table. The 13-year clock ties everything back to the frightened girl in the tree. Ymir's death was not just the end of one ancient life. It became a wound that keeps bleeding into the future, 2,000 years long. The number of years she happened to last after touching the creature became a hard limit pressed onto everyone who would ever follow her, as if her short, sorrowful life set the exact length of every powered life to come. Each holder who dies young is, in a strange way, repeating Ymir's death all over again, dying on the same schedule she did, trapped by the same invisible rule. The first slave's brief and painful existence stamped itself onto the future and never let go. The clock also explains the engine driving the whole tangled loop seen earlier in the story. Grisha rushed because he was dying. Eren felt the press of time because he was dying. The frantic, desperate quality of so many choices, the willingness to do monstrous things for the sake of a plan, grows partly out of this constant awareness that the sand is running out of the glass. A person with all the time in the world might wait, might search for a gentler path, might hope that things work out on their own. A person with 8 years left does not have that luxury. The countdown helps light the fire under everyone, pushing them toward extremes they might never have reached if they had simply been allowed to grow old. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. For all its power though, the 13-year curse is only one of the rules that govern these abilities, and it is far from the most frightening. Among the pieces that Ymir's power was broken into, the special titan scattered across the century. One of them stands above all the rest. It is the one that Grisha killed an entire family to steal, the one that every nation in the story would gladly burn the world to control. The others can fight and run and break through walls. This one can do something far more terrifying. It can reach into the giants themselves and command them, and it can reach into the minds of an entire people and rewrite what they remember. The true source of the deepest horror in Attack on Titan is the power sitting at the center of all the others, and what it can do is where the story turns from a tale of monsters into something much closer to a nightmare about control. Section 5. The power at the center. Among all the pieces that Ymir's great power was broken into, the special titan scattered across 2,000 years of history. One piece towers above the rest. It is the original heart of the power, the part closest to the first titan herself, and it is called the Founding Titan. Where the other powers grant a person the strength of a single giant, this one reaches far past muscle and size. The Founding Titan is the reason every nation in the story was willing to lie, steal, and burn to get its hands on it. A person who holds it, under the right conditions, holds something close to the power of a god over an entire people. To understand what the Founding Titan can do, the invisible web underneath the whole world has to come into view first. Every single person who carries Ymir's blood, every descendant of that ancient girl, no matter where they happen to live, is tied together by threads that no eye can see. These threads stretch across any distance, reaching from one end of the world to the other in a single heartbeat. They stretch across time as well, linking the people alive today to the who came before them. And they reach past death itself, connecting the living to the lingering minds of people who died long ago. This hidden web is the very place where Ymir's own self was trapped for 2,000 years after she died, laboring in the dark, and it is the strange road along which the bodies of the giants are built and carried, in a way the story describes as closer to magic than to anything a doctor could explain. All of these countless threads do not simply float free and tangled. They cross at one single point, and that point is the Founding Titan. Because it sits exactly where every thread meets, some people in the story gave it another name and called it the center, the place where all the connections of Ymir's bloodline gather into one. Whoever holds the Founding Titan sits at the middle of that vast web, touching, in a sense, every person tied to it across the whole world and across all of time. From that center, several terrible powers become possible, and each one is more frightening than the last. The first power is command over the mindless giants. With nothing more than a shout, the holder of the Founding Titan can seize control of the countless wandering monsters and bend them all to a single will, turning a scattered, aimless swarm of beasts into an obedient army that moves and strikes as one body. The creatures that the soldiers spent the entire early story bleeding and dying to escape can, in the right hands, be pointed and aimed the way a general aims his troops. Every shambling giant becomes a loyal soldier for the person sitting at the center, and there is no wall thick enough and no army large enough to stand against a horde of monsters that all obey one mind. Darker and far quieter is the second power. The holder of the Founding Titan can reach into the minds of Ymir's descendants and change what they remember. Memories can be softened, bent, or wiped away entirely. A person can be made to forget a face, a single day, or an entire stretch of their own life, and afterward they would carry no sense that anything had ever been taken from them. The power does not even require the holder to become a giant or let loose a mighty roar. In one quiet moment in the story, a young woman of the proper bloodline erased painful memories from a little girl she dearly loved while doing nothing more than speaking to her in a gentle voice, murmuring softly as the child's past slipped away between one sentence and the next. The single most dangerous weapon in the entire world can be fired with a whisper, and the target never even feels the shot. The reach of that mind-changing power is almost too vast to picture. Long ago, one king used the Founding Titan to erase the memories of an entire population in a single act. Every person living behind the walls was made to forget the world beyond them, to forget the long and bloody history their ancestors had lived through, to forget their own past so thoroughly that they came to believe they were the last humans left alive on one small island in an empty sea. A whole people's understanding of reality was rewritten at a stroke, and they then lived for 100 years inside that lie without the faintest suspicion it had ever been done to them. A power capable of that does more than win war. It quietly decides what is true and what is not for millions of people at once. The third power travels along those same invisible threads. The holder of the founding titan can change the very bodies of Ymir's descendants. With it, ordinary people can be turned into giants on command, even enormous ones, their human shape unwound and rebuilt into towering monsters in a matter of months. The same connection that carries stolen memories and barked orders can also reshape living flesh, which means the holder does not only command the giants that already exist. They can manufacture brand new ones out of living people whenever the mood strikes. A crowd of frightened civilians can be transformed into an army of monsters with a single thought. A rule sits on top of all this power, and for a very long time that rule was the only thing keeping the worst from happening. The full strength of the founding titan could only be unlocked by someone of the royal bloodline, the family that traces in a straight line back to Ymir and the king who owned her. A person lacking that special blood could hold the founding titan and still find themselves unable to truly use it, like gripping a key that simply refuses to turn in the lock. This was the exact trap that Eren fell into. He carried the founding titan, the most powerful weapon ever known, and for a long stretch of the story he could not switch it on because the blood running through him was not the royal kind. The greatest power in the world sat sleeping inside an ordinary boy, and finding a way to wake it became one of the central struggles of the entire second half of the tale. Eren's path around the lock eventually through making contact with a member of his own family who did carry the royal blood, a connection that finally let the sleeping power stir. The true horror of the founding titan lives inside that mind-changing power because it threatens something deeper than a person's life. A blade can take someone's life away. This power can take someone's self away. It can reach into a mind and decide who that person is, what they have lived through, what they love and fear and treasure, and it can do all of it without leaving a single bruise or making a single sound. A people whose memories belong to someone else are not truly free in any way that counts, even when they pass their days believing they are. They are living inside a story written for them by whoever holds the center, mistaking a cage built of false memories for the wide open. The most chilling idea the show quietly raises is that an entire society can be calm, content, and utterly certain of itself while being completely wrong about everything it thinks it knows, all because one person decided that it should be so. Command over the giants is terrifying in a louder and simpler way. The monsters that humanity had no real answer to, the towering things that devoured people by the thousands, all of them snap into obedience in the grip of the right holder. Stack that on top of the ability to rewrite minds and reshape bodies, and the founding titan stops resembling a mere weapon and starts resembling outright ownership of an entire people, their thoughts, their history, and the monsters that could be carved out of their bodies. That is the reason every nation in the story would gladly tear the world apart to control it. Whoever holds the center and carries the royal blood needed to use it does not simply gain an edge in battle. They hold the minds and the monsters of millions of people inside one closed fist. This web of threads turns out to be the secret machinery behind the strangest events seen earlier in the story. The way a boy was able to reach back through the years and whisper into his dead father's mind, the way knowledge slipped backward across time, the way memories flowed in directions that should be impossible. All of it traveled along these unseen connections. The threads pay no attention to distance, no attention to time, and no attention to death, which is precisely why the past and the future were able to reach out and touch one another inside a single shared memory. The founding titan, perched at the very center of that web, is the engine that made the whole impossible loop turn. The circle with no beginning had been spinning quietly along these threads the entire time, unseen and unbroken. Every bit of this ties straight back to the girl in the tree. The threads are the same ones the creature wove into being when it bonded with Ymir, the same endless web that swallowed her consciousness and held it for 2,000 years. The power that lets one person own the minds of millions is simply the grown and monstrous form of the gift, and the curse that a terrified slave was handed in the dark beneath the roots. This same power is the prize that Eren's father committed murder to steal. The most hungered after of all the cursed abilities, judged worth the lives of an entire family in the eyes of one desperate man. Every loose thread of the story keeps knotting itself back to that one ancient moment and the terrible thing it set loose upon the future. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A weapon like this, able to command every giant and rewrite every mind, sounds like exactly the sort of thing its owner would use to crush the whole world under his heel, without a flicker of mercy. Long ago, one king held precisely that power in his hands, and he made a choice that no conqueror in history would ever make. Rather than march out to rule everything within reach, he turned his back on all of it, herded his people onto a single island, and raised 3 colossal walls to hide them away from the world for good. The walls that humanity came to believe were nothing more than ordinary stone were never ordinary at all. And the strange promise that King swore on the day he sealed his people inside them was a promise that would quietly doom every last one of them 800 years down the road. Section 6. The walls were alive long before the walls existed, The people of Ymir's bloodline ruled the world through fear. For many centuries, the empire built on Ymir's power used the giants the way other nations used armies. Only no army could ever match them. With the Titans at their command, the rulers of the empire conquered land after land, crushed every nation that stood against them, and pressed the people they defeated into misery. The power born from one frightened slave in a tree had grown, over the long years, into the boot the whole world lived beneath. The empire was feared, and it was hated, and the hatred piled up quietly over the generations like snow gathering on a roof. Eventually, that hatred, along with the empire's own greed, tore the whole thing apart. A great war broke out, a war that turned the empire against itself as different families fought one another over the pieces of Ymir's power. While the rulers were busy clawing at each other, the people they had spent centuries oppressing saw their chance and rose up. The empire that had seemed unbreakable began to crack and crumble. Into this collapsing world stepped a king, the latest in the long royal line, a man who would come to be known as Karl Fritz, and he held the most powerful piece of all, the founding titan, the power at the center of everything. Karl Fritz looked at the wreckage his family had made of the world and felt something that none of his ancestors had allowed themselves to feel. He felt sick of it. Generation after generation of his bloodline had used the giants to conquer and to kill, and the result was a world drowning in blood and a people who were despised everywhere they were. Faced with the chance to fight on, to use the founding titan to crush the rebellion and hold the empire together, Karl Fritz chose to do something no conqueror before him had ever done. He decided to give it all up. Rather than wage one more war, the king gathered as many of his people as he could and turned his back on the empire entirely. He led them away from the mainland, away from the nations that hated them, to a large island sitting off the coast, a place called Paradis. There, on that island, he intended to build a final refuge, a place where his people could live out their days far from the rest of the world. And to build it, he reached for the terrible power at the center of the web, the same power his ancestors had used to conquer, only now he turned it toward a stranger purpose. What Karl Fritz did next is one of the most disturbing facts hidden inside the whole story. Using the founding titan, he took countless numbers of his own people and transformed their bodies into colossal titans, the largest and most powerful of the mindless giants. He did not send these giants out to fight. He stood them up, shoulder to shoulder, in 3 vast rings, and he hardened them into place until they formed the bones of 3 enormous walls. Then he covered them over, sealing the giants inside stone and earth, so that no one would ever see what the walls were truly made of. The 3 rings were named Maria, Rose, and Sina, the exact names of the 3 daughters that the first titan Ymir had born so long ago. The people sheltering inside those walls were living behind a barrier built from the bodies of their own kind, never knowing it, protected by millions of sleeping monsters pressed into the shape of a fortress. The king did not stop at building the walls. He reached into the minds of every one of his people living on the island and wiped their memories clean. He took away their knowledge of the world beyond the water, their memory of the empire and its crimes, their understanding of the war they had just fled. He scrubbed their history out of their heads so completely that, within a generation, the people inside the walls believed they were the last human beings alive anywhere on Earth. As far as they knew, the world was nothing but their 3 rings of stone surrounded by an endless, empty wasteland full of monsters. The truth, that they were exiles hiding from a world that remembered exactly who they were, vanished from every mind inside the world. To keep the outside world from following them onto the island, Karl Fritz sent out a warning, a threat meant to freeze the hand of anyone who might think of attacking. He declared that if any nation ever dared to make war on the people of the walls, the millions of colossal titans hidden inside those walls would be released to march across the entire world and flatten it into ruin. It was a horrifying promise, a threat to end everything, and it worked. For 100 years, no one dared to test it. The world left the island alone, terrified of waking the giants in the walls. The threat, though, was a lie. In secret, Karl Fritz confided the truth to a small handful of trusted families, both on the island and back on the mainland. He told them that the doomsday threat was nothing but a bluff, an empty warning with no will behind it, because the king had done something to the founding titan that no one outside that small circle knew about. He had used its power to bind himself and every royal heir who would ever inherit it after him with a solemn vow. The vow was a promise never to make war. From that day forward, no royal holder of the founding titan would ever be able to bring themselves to use its power to fight, to threaten, or to defend their people, even if the walls came under attack and the people inside were being slaughtered. The most powerful weapon in the world had been locked from the inside by the very king who could have wielded it. The reasoning behind the vow is the darkest part of all. Karl Fritz did not bind his power because he had grown gentle and kind. He did it because he had come to believe that his people deserved to be destroyed. In his mind, the empire's centuries of cruelty were a debt that had to be paid, and the only fair payment was the end of his own bloodline and his own people. He believed the people of the walls should be wiped out as punishment for the sins of their ancestors, and the vow was his way of making sure that, When the world finally came for them, they would have no way to fight back. He would give his people 100 quiet years of false peace, and then they would accept their slaughter as the price of their history. The walls were never built to save his people. They were built to delay an execution that the king himself had decided was deserved. This vow did not die with Karl Fritz. It lived on inside every royal heir who inherited the founding titan after him, passed down through the bloodline along with the power and the false belief that destruction was deserved. The royal family on the island, who quietly changed their name to hide who they really were, carried Karl Fritz's chains in their own hearts for the next 100 years. Each new royal holder felt the same strange unwillingness to fight, the same buried certainty that their people's end would be a kind of justice. None of them ever told their people the truth, and none of them ever lifted the lock their ancestor had set. The full horror of the vow finally surfaced on the day the walls were first broken. When the outer wall fell and the giants came pouring in, a desperate man fought his way to the hidden chamber where the royal holder of the founding titan waited, a young woman of royal line. He begged her, pleaded with her, to use the power she carried to stop the slaughter, to command the giants to halt and save the thousands of people being eaten alive above. She could have done it. The power to freeze every monster in its tracks sat right there inside her, and she refused. The vow her ancestor had made a century before reached through the years and held her still, would not let her raise the power even to save her own people from being devoured. So the people died in their thousands, within arm's reach of the very power that could have rescued every last one of them, all because a guilt-ridden king long dead had decided their deaths would be fair. The cruelty of this is hard to fully take in. The people inside the walls believed they were safe. They believed the great stone rings were there to protect them, simple barriers holding back the monsters of an empty world. The truth was the exact opposite of what they believed. The walls were not their shield. The walls were a weapon, a doomsday weapon made of their own transformed kin, held in reserve by a power that had been forbidden by sacred promise from ever being used to save them. They were a condemned people living inside their own execution chamber, smiling, raising families, going about ordinary lives, never told that a dead king had already signed their death warrant and simply set the date far enough away that none of them would notice. The freedom the people of the walls thought they had was the thinnest illusion imaginable. They were not free. They were prisoners with no memory of their crime, no knowledge of their sentence, and no idea that the calm sky above their heads was being held up by millions of silent giants waiting in the stone. Their peace was real enough to live inside, but it was a peace handed to them by a man who wanted them dead, a delay rather than a rescue. The whole comfortable world they knew was a guilt king's idea of a fair punishment, dressed up as a gift. Every piece of this connects back to the threads that run under the entire story. The walls bear the names of Ymir's daughters, tying the modern prison straight back to the first titan and the empire she was forced to build. The power that raised the walls and wiped the memories is the same power at the center of the web, used by one man to seal his people away rather than to rule the world. And the guilt that drove Karl Fritz to condemn his own people grew directly out of the centuries of conquest that began with one enslaved girl who could not say no to her master. The sins of the very beginning came to 100 generations later, paid for by people who had been robbed of any memory that there was a debt at all. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The king's grip on the minds of his people was very nearly complete. He erased the memories of an entire population and left almost no one inside them. Walls who knew the truth of where they came from or what waited for them, almost no one. Because a small number of people on that island could not be touched by the king's power at all. Their minds were locked against him, and so they kept their memories while everyone around them forgot. These few remembered the truth, refused to bow to the king's ideology, and became a danger to the careful lie he had built. Terrified that they might wake his sleeping people and shatter the false peace, the king turned his terrible power against them and tried to wipe them from the face of the earth. Who these unbreakable people were, and why even the power at the center of the world could not reach inside their heads, is a secret that runs through some of the strongest and most beloved characters in the entire story. Section 7. The ones who could not forget the king's power to rewrite minds was nearly perfect, sweeping across an entire population and leaving almost no one untouched, almost. Scattered among the people he sealed inside the walls were a few rare families whose minds simply could not be reached. The threads that let the founding titan reach into the heads of Ymir's descendants slid right past these people, unable to grab hold. Their memories stayed their own. When the king wiped the truth from every mind on the island, these families kept on remembering, walking around with the real history locked safely inside heads that no power could open. The most famous of these unreachable families carried a single name, a name that any fan of the show learns to respect very quickly. They were the Ackermans. Two of the most powerful and most loved characters in the entire story come from this one bloodline. There is Levi, a small and quiet man widely called the strongest soldier humanity had, a fighter so far beyond everyone around him that he seems to belong to a different species in battle. And there is Mikasa, the girl who grows up beside Eren, a fighter who finishes at the very top of her training class and stands nearly equal to Levi himself. For most of the early story, their incredible strength is simply accepted as a fact, the way a viewer accepts that the hero is brave or the villain is cruel. The reason behind that strength turns out to reach all the way back to the cruelty of the old empire. What sets the Ackermans apart goes beyond their locked minds. They cannot be turned into mindless giants the way most of Ymir's bloodline can, and they carry a sleeping strength inside them, a power that most of them live their whole early lives without ever touching. When that power wakes, an Ackerman becomes something close to a one-person army. Their bodies move faster and hit harder than any normal human body has any right to, matching the raw strength of a giant while still wearing human skin. Stranger still, an awakened Ackerman can suddenly fight with skill they were never taught, as though the combat experience of every Ackerman who came before them pours into their muscles all at once. Lifetimes of fighting knowledge, inherited in an instant. The waking of that power tends to come in a single violent moment, a moment where the Ackerman is staring dead in the face. Mikasa's awakening is the clearest one the show ever puts on screen, and it happens when she is only 9 years old. A group of men murder her parents and drag her away, planning to sell her, and a young Eren arrives to try to save her. In the middle of that terror, with both children moments from dying, Eren tells her to fight. Something inside Mikasa snaps awake. A small girl who had never harmed anyone suddenly kills a grown man with a single thrust, crushes the handle of a knife in her bare hand, and snaps thick floorboards with the strength of her body. The frightened child becomes, in one heartbeat, a killer capable of things no 9-year-old should be able to do. Levi went through a moment like that somewhere in his own brutal past, and so did the most dangerous Ackerman of all, a notorious killer named Kenny, who once terrorized the streets and later helped raise Levi. The origin of all this power is the part that turns the Ackermans from impressive fighters into something tragic. Much later in the story, the truth comes out, and it is bleak. The Ackermans were not born strong by some happy accident of nature. They were made. Back in the days of the old empire, when its rulers were experimenting with the giants and with the power running through Ymir's bloodline, they produced something they had not quite planned for. They created a line of human beings who carried the strength of a giant inside an ordinary human body. People who could fight like monsters without ever needing to transform into one. These engineered humans were shaped for a single purpose: to serve as the perfect bodyguards and weapons for the king, loyal warriors, strong enough to protect the royal family from any threat. The Ackermans were built like a tool is built, with a job already chosen for them before any of them were ever born. For a long time, they did exactly what they were made to do. They guarded the kings, fought their battles, and stood as the sharp edge of the royal family's protection. Then came Karl Fritz and his plan to abandon the empire, flee to the island, and erase everyone's memories. The Ackermans refused to go along with it. They would not accept the king's choice to wipe away their people's history and lock everyone inside a comforting lie. And because the king's mind-changing power could not touch them, they posed a danger no other group did. They remembered everything. They knew the truth that the king was trying to bury, and at any moment one of them might speak it aloud and wake his sleeping people from the dream he had so carefully built. A king who has just rewritten the minds of an entire population cannot allow a handful of people to wander around, remembering what really happened. So the king turned on the very family that had been built to protect him. Terrified that the Ackermans would expose his lie, he ordered them hunted down and wiped out, and the persecution very nearly. The proud bloodline of warriors was driven almost to extinction, slaughtered by the same royal line they had spent generations defending. The few Ackermans who survived only managed it by going quiet. They hid what they knew, pretended to be ignorant like everyone else, and never once spoke of the old truth, not even to their own children. They swallowed their history to stay alive. That silence is the reason Kenny, Levi, and Mikasa all grew up with no idea where their strength came from or what their ancestors had known. The truth was bred out of their daily lives, even though it could never be erased from their blood. By the time the story takes place, only a tiny handful of Ackermans are left in the world. Kenny became one of the most feared killers his nation had ever produced. Levi rose to become the single most capable soldier in the fight against the giants, a living legend whose name alone gave people hope. And Mikasa grew into a fighter of nearly equal skill, fierce and unshakable, the kind of person who could turn the tide of a battle by herself. 3 survivors of a hunted family, each one carrying enough power to be worth an army, the last sparks of a bloodline that the kings tried to put out. Mikasa carried something extra as well, because on her mother's side she came from another hunted family, an Asian line that had also been persecuted and that also could not be controlled. By the power at the center, 2 endangered bloodlines met in one girl, which helps explain why she stands out even among the rare and mighty Ackermans. The tragedy buried in all of this is heavy. The Ackermans were created to be weapons, shaped and bred for the convenience of kings, handed a purpose they never chose. And once they were no longer convenient, once they dared to think for themselves and refused to bow, those same kings threw them away and tried to erase them from the earth. A family designed for loyalty was repaid with a hunt. There is something deeply unfair in being made strong by someone else's design, used while you are useful, and then destroyed the moment you become inconvenient. The Ackermans never asked to be what they are, and they suffered terribly for it anyway. A genuine debate sits inside the Ackerman story, one the fans have argued over for years. At one point, Eren tells Mikasa that the Ackermans are not entirely free in their hearts, that their bloodline drives them to pick a single person to protect, a kind of master, and to obey that person's orders without question once their power awakens. By his telling, Mikasa's fierce loyalty to him was never really her own choice, but an instinct planted in her blood, forcing her to follow him the way the Ackermans were built to follow their king. The story, though, leaves plenty of room to doubt that this is true. Many who watch closely believe Eren said it as a lie, a cruel thing meant to push Mikasa away and harden her against him for reasons of his own. Mikasa's own words point the other direction, suggesting that her strength and her choices came from her own understanding of how cruel the world is, not from a leash hidden in her blood. The story never fully settles which version is real, and that uncertainty is part of what makes Mikasa's whole journey so painful. That open question circles right back to the idea that beats underneath the entire show, the idea of freedom. The Ackermans are a family whose strength was written into them by other people long before they were born, for purposes they never agreed to. The frightening possibility that even their loyalty, even their love, might be part of that design strikes at the heart of what it means to choose anything at all. A person who fights with borrowed skill, who awakens at a stranger's command, who may or may not be bound to protect a chosen master, has to wonder how much of their life truly belongs to them. Mikasa spends the story wrestling with exactly that, trying to figure out whether her devotion is a choice she is proud of or a chain she was born wearing, and the show treats that struggle with real weight. Everything about the Ackermans connects back to the threads running under the whole story. Their immunity to the king's power makes them the great exception to the control described before, the few minds the center of the web could never own. Their strength is giant strength poured into human shape, drawn from the same ancient source that gave Ymir her power in the tree, a leftover of the old empire's hunger to turn that power into weapon. And their persecution is one more crime in the long ledger of the kings, a debt added to the pile of guilt that Karl Fritz believed his whole people deserved to die for. The Ackermans are living proof that the cruelty of the beginning never really stopped echoing forward. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Of the two people who matter most to Eren in all the world, one of them is Mikasa, the Ackerman girl who awakened the day he told her to fight. The other is Armin, the gentle, clever boy who grew up beside them both. These two are the anchors of Eren's entire life, the people his whole heart is built around, the ones he claims to be protecting through everything he does. And there is something genuinely eerie waiting in the history of those two names. Decades before either Mikasa or Armin was in a far-off nation across the sea, a man who would never meet them, never see their faces, never have any natural way of knowing they would ever exist, spoke both of their names out loud. A stranger from the past, standing in the wrong place and the wrong time entirely, somehow knew two children who had not yet been born. How that could possibly happen pulls on one of the strangest threads in the whole story. Section 8. The names spoken too soon of the people Eren keeps closest to his heart. Two stand above everyone else. One is Mikasa, the Ackerman girl who awakened the day Eren told her to fight. The other is Armin, the small, soft-spoken, clever boy who grew up at their side and dreamed of seeing the ocean and the world beyond the walls. These two are the foundation Eren stands on. Whatever terrible things he does as the story goes on, he insists he is doing them to protect these two and the handful of friends gathered around them. Mikasa and Armin are the reason he gives himself for it, and tucked away in the history of those two names is one of the eeriest facts in the entire show. The man at the center of this strange fact has already appeared once before in the story. His name was Eren Kruger, the very same fighter who handed Grisha the Attack Titan years before Eren Yeager was. Kruger gave Grisha both power and the deadly clock that came with it, and then he died, his 13 years run out. He seems at first glance like a minor figure, a stepping stone on the way to the real story. The truth is that Kruger lived one of the most remarkable lives in the whole tale, and his final words carry a weight that takes the entire rest of the show to fully understand. For years, Kruger lived a double life inside the enemy nation, a place far across the sea from the island, the home of the very people who hated Ymir's bloodline most. He buried himself deep inside the enemy's own ranks, working among their secret police, the cruel men whose job was to hunt down and crush people like him. To everyone around him, he looked like a loyal officer of that hateful. In secret, he was something else entirely. He was a legend among his own oppressed people, a hidden resistance leader known only by a code name, the Owl, a ghost the enemy feared and could never seem to catch. For years, he wore the uniform of his enemies by day and worked to free his people by night, hiding in plain sight, swallowing his rage so completely that he could stand beside the most vicious of his enemies and never give himself away. Kruger's control was so total that he once worked side by side with one of the most hateful officers in that force, a man who poured out endless cruelty against Ymir's people. Kruger sat through that man's poison, even slacked off and joked with him, never letting a single crack show. And when the time finally came, Kruger killed that officer without a flicker of feeling, ending him as coldly as closing a door. A man who could carry that much hidden fury for that long without ever once slipping is a rare and frightening kind of person. When the moment came for Kruger to pass on his power, he chose Grisha, a young man whose family had just been destroyed by the enemy. Kruger saved Grisha's life, revealed the enormous truth about the world that Grisha had never known, and explained the history of the giants and the king and the strange promise that had sealed the people of the island away. He told Grisha the name of the power he was about to receive, the Attack Titan, the same name the whole show secretly carries. He even pressed an old family photograph into Grisha's hands before the end. And then, in those final moments, Kruger said something that should have made no sense at all. Standing over the young man who was about to inherit everything, Kruger gave Grisha a warning. He told him that simply chasing the mission, simply burning for revenge against the enemy, would lead nowhere good. He warned that without love, without a family, without people to hold on to, Grisha would only feed the endless cycle of hatred that had already swallowed so many lives. A man needed something to cherish, or the whole struggle would rot into more of the same cruelty. And in that same breath, urging Grisha to love and protect the people who would matter to him, Kruger named two of them. He told Grisha to save Mikasa. He told him to save Armin. Grisha had no idea who those people were. At that point in his life, he had no wife, no children, and certainly no friends by either of those names. The little girl named Mikasa would not be born for many years. The gentle boy named Armin did not yet exist. The names landed on empty air, pointing at children who were nowhere in the world. To Grisha, they were two meaningless sounds spoken by a dying man, and he had no way to make sense of them. Only far later, long after Grisha himself was gone, would those names finally find their owners and reveal just how impossible the moment had truly been. A man dying in the enemy nation, decades early, had spoken aloud the names of two children who would one day stand beside his unborn son. Kruger himself did not seem to fully understand what he was saying. As he spoke those final words, he drifted strangely, talking about a wife and a son he did not have, describing memories that did not belong to him, mixing his own life up with someone else's life that had not happened. He seemed almost confused by his own mouth, as though thoughts were arriving in his head from somewhere far away and pouring out before he could stop them. A dying man speaking the memories of a stranger, naming people he could not possibly know, sounding less like himself and more like an echo of someone yet to come. The explanation for all of it circles right back to the power Kruger carried. The Attack Titan, alone among the special powers, lets its holder reach the memories of the people who will carry it in the future. Kruger held the Attack Titan. The person who would one day carry it after Grisha was Eren Yeager, so Eren's memories, his life, his friends, his world, were able to flow backward along the invisible threads and seep into Kruger's mind years before Eren was even born. When Kruger spoke of Mikasa and Armin, he was speaking from inside Eren's memories without fully realizing it. The names were not pulled from Kruger's own life. They were borrowed from a future that was leaking into him through the power he held. A name is a strange and specific thing. A person can guess at the shape of a future, can sense that hard times are coming, or that a child might someday be born. Guessing the exact name of a particular person who does not yet exist is something else entirely. Kruger did not vaguely sense that Grisha's son would someday have friends. He named them. He reached out and grabbed two precise names out of a future that had not arrived. The names of an Ackerman girl and a dreaming boy, and he said them out loud in a place those children would never visit, to a man who would never meet them. That kind of knowledge cannot come from luck or instinct. It can only come from information sliding backward through time. Future Eren almost certainly had a hand in it. The same young man who reached back to push his own father into murder, who steered the monster that ate his own mother, appears to have reached back even further, all the way to Kruger, decades before his parents had ever met. By feeding those names and memories into Kruger, future Eren made sure that the warning Kruger gave Grisha would carry the exact weight it needed to carry. The whole chain had to hold together. Grisha had to be told to value love and family, and the proof of that advice, the names of the very people Eren would come to cherish, had to be planted early so the loop could close clean. The boy who arranged his own tragedy was arranging this one too, reaching back across an even greater stretch of time to whisper two names into a dying stranger's mouth. There is a deep sadness folded into Kruger's final scene because of this. A man at the end of a hard and lonely life, giving what he believes are his own last words of wisdom, and even those words were not fully his. The advice was real and the kindness was real, but the most striking part of it, the names, came from a child who would not be born for years, borrowed without Kruger ever understanding why he knew them. He died as a kind of messenger, carrying a note he could not read, passing along a truth that belonged to someone else's future. Even a man as strong and as clever as the owl turned out to be one more thread in a circle that someone yet to come was quietly tying shut. This single moment is the cleanest, sharpest proof of the loop that runs through the whole story. Earlier, the loop showed itself in Eren whispering to his father inside a memory, which was strange enough on its own. The names spoken by Kruger push it further and make it impossible to wave away. The loop did not begin with Grisha. It reached back past him to a spy in the enemy nation, before Aaron's mother and father had even crossed paths. The future was writing the past at a distance of decade, planting seeds in the minds of people who lived and died long before the boy at the center of it all drew his first breath. The road those names traveled is the same hidden web seen before, the threads connecting everyone of Ymir's blood across distance, across death, and across time. Information that should be locked forever in the future slipped backward along those threads and surfaced in the wrong century. Mikasa, the last of a hunted warrior family, and Armin, the boy who only wanted to see the sea, had their names spoken before either of them existed, carried back through that web by a power that pays no attention to the order in which things are supposed to happen. The threads made the impossible ordinary, and a dying man in the enemy's uniform became living proof that in this story, the future and the past are always reaching for each other. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Backward-flowing knowledge like this was never a single freak event. It is woven into the show so deeply that it appears in the very first thing the audience ever sees. Before any of the history, before the walls fall, before a single giant steps on screen, the story opens on a small boy waking up with tears running down his face, gasping from a dream he cannot understand or explain. A young Mikasa sits beside him and gently asks why he is crying, and the boy has no answer to give her. That dream seemed, for years, like nothing more than a strange and sad little moment to begin a story with. The truth is that the very first scene of the entire show was the future leaking into the past once more, the ending of the whole tale reaching all the way back to its own beginning, and the reason that boy was crying would not become clear until the final pages of the story finally. Section 9. Why the boy was crying. The very first thing the entire show ever puts in front of its audience is a small, quiet, easily forgotten moment. A young Eren lies on the ground, and he wakes up with tears streaming down his face, gasping like someone surfacing from deep water. Beside him sits a young Mikasa, who looks at him with worry and gently asks why he is crying. Eren cannot answer her, wipes at his eyes, confused, and mutters something about having had a long dream, a dream that is already slipping away from him even as he tries to hold on to it. He does not understand his own tears. Then the moment passes, the real story begins, and the strange little scene fades into the background. For years, that opening seemed like nothing more than a soft, sad way to begin a story, a tiny bit of mystery to set a mood before the giants arrived and the world fell apart. Audiences watched it, felt a vague tug of sadness, and moved on, swept up in the action and horror that followed. The crying boy in his forgotten dream sat quietly at the very start of everything, waiting. Almost no one suspected that this throwaway opening held the ending of the entire story tucked inside it, hidden in plain sight from the first second, in exactly the way the show loves to hide its biggest truth. A small boy crying over a dream he cannot remember is a gentle image. The reason behind those tears, once it finally comes clear at the very end of the story, turns that gentle image into something that aches. Eren was not crying over an ordinary nightmare. He was crying because, through the strange loop that runs under the whole tale, the ending had already reached him. The grief of everything that was going to happen, every loss and every horror still many years away, had flowed backward through time and landed inside a child who had not yet lived a single moment of it. In the original drawn version of the story, the dream that made young Eren weep ended on a very specific note. The last thing in that dream, the final image before he woke in tears, was Mikasa speaking to him. She said only a few simple words, "See you later, Eren," and then he was awake and crying and unable to explain why. Those few words meant nothing to a child at the start of his life. They were a farewell with no goodbye attached to it, spoken in a dream he could not hold. The weight inside them would not become clear until the final pages of the whole story finally arrived, thousands of pages later. The moving version of the story, the animated one, chose to show a slightly different dream in its opening. There, the nightmare that woke young Eren was filled with images of horror to come, glimpses of people being devoured, the kind of terror that the world was about to unleash on him. The two versions point in slightly different direction, one toward a quiet farewell and one toward coming bloodshed, and the creator treated the animated telling as his final and most polished draft. Both versions share the same buried secret underneath their difference. In both, the dream that made a child cry was never about the past or the present. It was about the future, reaching back to touch him before he was ready. Both openings work because of the same impossible truth. The events of the very end of the story, Eren's final days, his final choices, and his final moments were able to travel backward along the invisible threads and seep into his younger self. The boy lying on the grass had, in some deep and dreamlike way, already brushed against the ending. He had already felt the sorrow of what he was going to become and what he was going to lose. His child mind could not understand any of it, could not hold on to the images or name the grief, but his body wept anyway, mourning a future that had not happened to him yet. The tears were real, even though the loss was still years and years away. The answer to why those particular words echoed in his dream waits at the climax of the whole story, and it ties the beginning and the end together like the two ends of a single thread. Many years after that opening scene, after everything has happened, after Eren has become something terrible, and the world has been pushed to the brink, the story returns to Mikasa and Eren one final time. In a quiet, dreamlike space outside the normal world, the two of them share a last moment together. Mikasa finally speaks the love she has carried for him their whole lives. She thanks him for a small kindness from long ago, for the red scarf he once wrapped around her neck when they were children, the scarf that became the symbol of the bond between them. And then she says the same simple words from the very beginning. See you later, Eren. Mikasa speaks that farewell at the hardest possible moment, because she is the one who ends his life. In the story's final stretch, with the world burning and Eren having become the greatest threat it has ever faced, it falls to Mikasa, the Ackerman girl who once awakened at his command stop him. She is the one who kills him, the same person who has spent her entire life protecting Eren, the person who loves him more than anyone, becomes the one who must end him to save what is left of the world. And as she does it, she gives him the goodbye that has been waiting since the first page, the words that flowed all the way back through time into a crying child's dream. The farewell at the end and the tears at the beginning are the same moment, separated by a whole lifetime and joined by a loop that never had a true start or finish. The boy at the beginning was crying because the man at the end was about to lose everything. Eren glimpsed, through the dream, what his life would cost him. He saw the person he would turn into, the unthinkable things he would do, and the way it would all end with the girl beside him having to take his life. A child cannot carry knowledge like that, so it came out the only way it could, as tears he could not explain to a friend who only wanted to comfort him. The saddest opening imaginable was sitting right there in the first scene, disguised as a small, sleepy mystery, and the show simply let it sit until the audience had earned the right to understand it. A child weeping over a grief he has not lived yet is a heartbreaking idea on its own. What makes it land even harder is how perfectly it fits the shape of the entire story. The whole tale is a circle, a loop that ends exactly where it begins. It opens with two children, Eren and Mikasa, and a few quiet words. It closes with the same two people and the very same words. Everything monstrous and enormous that happens in between, the walls, the giants, the wars, the slaughter, is bracketed by that one small farewell, spoken once at the start in a dream and once at the end in truth. The story swallows its own tail, and the proof was placed in the audience's hands before the real plot had even begun. The red scarf threads through all of it as the gentlest symbol in the whole show. Eren first wrapped that scarf around a freezing, frightened Mikasa on the day they met, after he helped save her, and from that moment, it became the thing that tied the two of them together. Across the entire story, through every battle and every horror, the scarf keeps reappearing, a small splash of warm color carried through a cold and brutal world. By the end, the scarf becomes the last thing they speak of, Mikasa thanking him for that small act of kindness from so long ago. The bond formed in that single childhood moment turns out to be the one thing strong enough to survive everything the story throws at it, lasting right up until the final farewell and beyond. Eren reveals, near the end, that this painful arrangement was always the way things had to be. Mikasa was always the one meant to end his life, and in doing so, she would set free not only the world, but also the ancient suffering spirit of the first Titan herself, the girl from the tree who had been trapped for 2,000 years. Eren holds no anger toward Mikasa for killing him. He understands it as the necessary merciful close to a story that could end no other way. The person who loved him had to be the one to release him, and through that single act, she would unlock chains that had bound an entire people since the very beginning of the world. The mercy and the tragedy are folded into the same moment, impossible to separate. This bookend connects to the eeriest threads already pulled in the story. The future flowing backward into Kruger, naming children before their birth, was the same force flowing backward into a crying boy, mourning an end before it came. The loop that let Eren whisper to his dead father was the same loop that let his own ending visit his beginning. The show hid its true shape in the title before the first episode, and it hid its true heart in the first scene, trusting the audience to circle back once they finally understood enough to feel the full weight of a child's unexplained tears. Every one of these threads points to the same quiet idea, that in this story, the beginning and the end were always touching. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The dream that broke a small boy's heart was the ending of the whole story, and that ending is the heaviest, most argued over part of everything Attack on Titan ever did. Eren wept as a child because he had seen what he was going to become, and what he became was the person who would carry out the single most terrible act in the entire history of his world, a horror so vast that the mind struggles to hold it. The full truth of what Eren did in those final days, the reason he chose it, the staggering price the world paid for it, and the haunting question of whether any of it truly broke the cycle of hatred or simply spun the wheel, one more time is where this long, strange, sorrowful story finally comes to rest. Section 10. The tree grows again. The terrible act that made a small boy weep at the very start of the story is the same act that brings the whole tale to its end, and it is so vast and so dark that the world Eren lived in had no word large enough to hold it. By the final stretch of the story, Eren has learned everything. He knows the true history of his people, the crimes of the old empire, the lies sealed inside the walls, and the simple, crushing fact that the rest of the world hates the people of his island and is preparing to wipe them out completely. The nations across the sea look at the island and see a nest of monsters that must be destroyed before it can strike first. Eren, the boy who only ever wanted to be free and to protect the few people he loved, stands at the center of all this knowledge with the most powerful weapon in the world sleeping inside him. For a long time, that weapon stayed locked. The full strength of the Founding Titan could only be used by someone of royal blood, and Eren did not carry it. The most dangerous power ever known sat inside him useless, a key that refused to turn. The lock finally broke when Eren made contact with his own half-brother, a man who did carry the royal blood through their shared family line. That single connection turned the key. In an instant, the sleeping power at the center of the web came fully awake, and everything Eren had quietly been moving toward his whole life was suddenly within his reach. What Eren did with that power is the single most destructive act in the history of his world. He reached into the three great walls that had protected his people for 100 years, the walls built from millions of colossal titans by the guilty king long ago, and he undid the hardening that held those giants frozen in place. The walls cracked and crumbled, and out of them rose an ocean of colossal monsters, more than anyone could count, all of them now bound to Eren's single. The doomsday weapon that Karl Fritz had built and then sworn never to use, the threat he had only ever meant as a bluff to frighten the world, came roaring to life under the command of a boy he never met. Eren led that endless army of giants off the island and out into the wider world, and the event came to be called the Rumbling, because the ground itself shook beneath the weight of so many marching. The giants moved in a vast wall of bodies taller than mountains, flattening everything in their path. Cities vanished beneath them. Whole nations were trampled into dust. Forests, farms, towns, and the millions of people living in them were crushed and erased as the unstoppable tide rolled across the land. By the time it was over, roughly 4 out of every 5 people in the entire world outside the island had been killed. The sheer scale of the death is almost impossible to picture, an emptying of the world on a level no war had ever come close to. The frightened, kind-hearted boy from the start of the story had become the greatest mass killer his world had ever produced. The reasons behind such a thing are tangled, and the story refuses to make them simple. On the surface, Eren did it to protect his home. The world wanted his people dead, and he struck first with overwhelming force, removing the threat by removing most of the people who posed it. Underneath that, there was a colder and more careful plan. Eren intended to gather every drop of the world's hatred onto himself, to make himself into a monster so enormous and so unforgivable that all of humanity would unite against him. He wanted his closest friends to be the ones who stopped him and killed him. By doing that, his friends would become heroes in the eyes of whatever survivors remained, the brave few who brought down the worst villain in history, and through their heroism, the people of his island might finally be accepted by the rest of the world, rather than hunted forever. He planned to make himself the villain, so that the people he loved could be saved by defeating him. There was another layer beneath even that. Eren's death would end the power of the Titans entirely. Every bit of the strange power that traced back to the girl in the tree was bound up with him in those final moments, and when he died, all of it would die too. Every person who had been turned into a mindless giant would become human again. The 13-year curse that had doomed so many would be lifted forever. The whole monstrous machine that had haunted the world for 2,000 years would simply switch off. In that sense, the end of Eren was meant to be the end of the Titans for good, a final closing of the wound that the creature in the water had opened so long ago. The deepest reason of all is the one that hurts the most, because it is the simplest and the least noble. When Eren finally spoke the truth to his gentlest friend in the quiet space outside the world, he admitted that beneath all the plans and all the justifications, he had wanted to do it. He had stood beyond the walls as a younger man, seen the wide-open world stretching to the horizon, and felt a hunger for it, a need for a world that was empty and open and free, with nothing left to hem him in. He wanted to flatten everything. He could not fully explain the urge even to himself. He only knew that he had to keep moving forward, always had, the way the advancing giant of the title always did, and he could not stop. The boy who chased freedom harder than anyone chased it all the way into horror, and at the bottom of it, he found a want he could not name and could not master. That want looped straight back to the trap he was caught in from the beginning. Eren had seen this ending long before it arrived. He had watched himself do this thing through the memories that flowed backward to him, the same way the crying child in the first scene had brushed against the sorrow of the end. Having seen it, he walked toward it, unable to step off the road, because the road was built from his own memories of a future he had already glimpsed. Whether he truly chose to flatten the world or simply followed the path he had already watched himself. Walk is a question the story leaves open, the same way it leaves so many of its hardest questions open. The freest seeming act imaginable, the wiping clean of a whole world, was carried out by the least free person in the story, a young man marching down a track laid by his own future. His friends would not let him finish. The people closest to Eren, including the gentle boy and the Ackerman girl who had loved him their whole lives, banded together with old enemies to try to stop the rumbling before it killed every last soul on. They chased him, fought him, and threw everything they had against the boy who had once been one of them. In the end, it was Mikasa who reached him, Mikasa who gave him the farewell that had echoed all the way back to the first page, and Mikasa who ended his life. The giants stopped their march. The rumbling halted before the world was completely emptied, leaving a battered and grieving remnant of humanity alive in the ruins. The moment of Eren's death rippled all the way back to the very beginning of everything. When he died, the power of the Titans broke apart and dissolved. Across the world, every person who had been transformed into a giant turned back into an ordinary human, waking up confused and human-shaped where a monster had stood moments before. The curse that had chained Ymir's bloodline for 2,000 years lifted all at once, and the ancient spirit of Ymir herself, the frightened slave girl who had been trapped in the web of thread since her death, working without rest for 20 centuries, was finally set free. The stories makes clear that Mikasa's choice was the key to releasing her, and the reason carries a heavy, sorrowful logic. Ymir had spent her whole life unable to break free of the man who owned her. Even with godlike power in her hands, she had loved her cruel master, served him, borne his children, and died protecting him, never once able to choose herself over the person who hurt her. For 2,000 years afterward, she lingered in the threads, still bound, still serving, waiting for something she could not name. What she seems to have been waiting for was the sight of someone making the choice she never could, the choice to let go of a beloved person for the sake of freedom. Mikasa, who loved Eren more than anything in the world, chose to end him so that the world could be free. In that choice, Ymir finally saw a way to release her own grip on the love that had imprisoned her. The first slave was freed by watching a girl do the one thing she herself had never managed. After 2,000 years, Ymir let go, and her long imprisonment ended. With Ymir freed and the Titans gone, the story arrives at its final image, and that image quietly undoes any sense of a clean, happy ending. Mikasa buries a piece of Eren beneath a single tree on the island, a quiet grave for the boy she loved and killed. Then the story leaps forward in time, and the camera settles on that tree once more. It has grown. Over the years, it has swelled into something enormous, towering and ancient and strange, and anyone who has been paying attention feels a chill because the tree looks almost exactly like the great tree from the very beginning of the whole story. It looks like the tree where a frightened girl named Ymir once fell into the dark and touched the creature that started everything. The story has circled all the way back to where it began, 2,000 years later, with another massive tree standing over the place where it all turned. The meaning of that tree is the heaviest idea the story leaves behind. The creature that gave Ymir her power, the source of all the giants and all the suffering, was always tied to that first tree, swelling it to an unnatural size simply by resting beneath it. Now a matching tree stands over Eren's grave, hinting that the strange power at the root of the world never truly went anywhere, that it is still there, waiting, sleeping in the earth the way it slept before. The image suggests very quietly that the whole terrible cycle might be able to begin again, that another frightened person might one day stumble into the dark and touch something they should not, and that the long story of power and hatred and giants could start its turn all over again from the very beginning. The story pushes this haunting idea even further in its final glimpses of the future. Eren's monstrous act was meant to buy his people lasting peace, to end the hatred and let the survivors live without fear. The far future shows that the peace did not last. As the years roll on, the world slowly finds its way back to suspicion, to division, and eventually to war once more. The island that Eren killed most of the world to protect does not stay safe forever. The cycle of fear and violence that has run through the whole story, generation after generation, simply keeps running after he is gone. The enormous price he paid, the millions of lives he ended, bought a pause rather than a cure. And in the final, quiet moments, a small child wanders toward the great tree on the island, drawn to it just as Ymir was drawn to hers, and the door to the whole cycle hangs open once again. This is where the great debate about the ending lives, and honest fans have argued over it ever since the story finished. One way to read it is hopeful. Eren ended the Titans forever, lifted the curse that had doomed his people for 2,000 years, set the ancient slave Ymir free at last, and gave the world a chance, however fragile, to live without the monsters that had haunted it. His friends carried on, scattered the message of his sacrifice, and the survivors had the freedom to try, at least, to do better than the people who came before them. By this reading, the cost was unthinkable, but something real was gained, and the chains of the past were finally broken. The other way to read it is far bleaker, and the imagery of the story leans toward it. By this reading, Eren slaughtered most of humanity and accomplished nothing lasting. The peace crumbled, the wars returned, the tree grew back. The frightened want that drove Ymir and then drove Eren is still buried in the world, ready to bloom again in someone new. The cycle of hatred that the whole story examines so closely was never broken at all. It was only paused, spun once more, and set loose to keep turning long after everyone who fought and died was forgotten. The genocide bought a delay and called it freedom. The most generous gift Eren could give the world was a little more time, and time the story seems to say, always runs out the same way. The truth the story offers sits somewhere in the uncomfortable space between those two readings, and it refuses to choose for the audience. Both things are real. The Titans really did end, the curse really was lifted, Ymir really was freed, and the peace really did fail, and the tree really did grow back, and the cycle really did keep turning. The story holds the hope and the despair in the same hand and asks its audience to carry both at once, the way it asked them to carry a child's unexplained tears and a man's terrible choices and a slave's 2,000-year sorrow all at the same time. It is not a tidy ending. It was never going to be one. Every thread pulled across this whole long story knots itself together here, at the foot of that final tree. The name of the show, The Advancing Giant, came true in the worst possible way, because Eren became exactly that, a giant charging forward across the entire world. Unstoppable, never halting. The attacker the English title always hinted at. The loop with no beginning closed and then quietly open again. The future writing the past and the past delivering the future, around and around. The girl in the tree was finally freed, only for a new tree to rise and a new child to approach it. The curse and the power and the walls and the war all trace back to one frightened slave and one strange creature, and at the end they trace right back to the same place. A tree, a child, and the pull of something waiting in the dark. And underneath all of it runs the single word that the whole story was always about: freedom. Eren wanted it so badly that he flattened a world to reach it, and the freedom he found was hollow and stained with the blood of millions. Ymir wanted it and could never take it until a girl who loved a boy showed her how to let. The people of the walls thought they had it and were living in a cage the whole time. The Ackermans were strong enough to seize it and may have been bound by their own blood instead. Over and over, the story holds up freedom as the thing everyone reaches for and almost no one truly grasps, a horizon that keeps moving away no matter how hard they charge toward it. The advancing giant of the title spends 2,000 years and a whole world's worth of lives chasing it, and in the end the chase simply begins again with someone new. The story closes the way it opened, the tree and a child and a quiet waiting pull, which means it never really closes at all. The same shape that ran through everything, the circle with no clean beginning and no clean end, swallows the ending too. A new child stands before the great tree, just as a frightened girl once stood before another. The names still waits at the top of the screen, holding it secret for whoever has not yet learned to read it. And somewhere near the start, a small boy is waking up with tears on his face from a dream he cannot remember, while a girl beside him gently asks why he is crying. And the whole long, sorrowful, beautiful story of the advancing giant stands ready to turn once more from the very beginning. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.